Polymarket, just taking a look at some stuff here. I still think that this is a place to go to check in on how things are happening, and I was very surprised to see this chart right here. I mean, look at how this convergence has happened. And I mean, this is the kind of thing I guess it could be manipulated, right? Because most of this is all just about money and betting. So if you have enough money, I suppose you could start to say, I bet this way and manipulate these markets. I haven't really ever contemplated what it would take to do something like that, but I'd imagine if you're putting money on the line, you could end up in a very upside down position on something like this. Lucas, I know that you at some point are going to start betting here and seeing if you can be right on these things. But I did note that this pretty much says that there is no third entity in the race, yet there is. So we continuously see Kennedy getting snubbed on this election forecast.
I think this is a better place to spend your money than political contributions to candidates, 100%. But I'm both not surprised at the convergence of Trump and Harris. What I am surprised at is that Bobby Kennedy is not rising. He doesn't even appear on this chart. And you, I mean, I know that you're also a fan of Bobby Kennedy, and I don't mean to make this an echo chamber for the Kennedy campaign, but he's been on mainstream media recently. He's CBS. He's done several interviews, and I still think that he has some very important things to say. I am not surprised at the popularity in Harris, though, despite the still sort of latent issues in the Democratic Party with regards to her actual nomination as their candidate. I think her well, she's had a lot of publicity with her selection of her vice president. So we'll see how that works its way out. I know that you know him well, like you live in his state, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, and so you have a lot better of appreciation of his history than I do. He's been off of my radar, and I'm learning about him. But what I what we are also seeing is a divergence between the party lines with regards to support for Israel and to a lesser extent Ukraine. And
Well, wait. Before we go there, let's stick on the Biden Harris thing for just a minute. Did you see all these allegations about astroturfing that's happening, like where the Harris campaign, well, not the Harris campaign, but super PACs associated with supporting Harris have been paying TikTokers and YouTubers and all types of influencers some amount of cash to pretend like they're supporting Harris when they're really getting paid to do it. Have you seen much on this?
I haven't, but again, I'm not actually that surprised. I mean, the right loves to make fun of Harris for her, her her broad statements, her very broad statements, unburdened by what has been, what can be unburdened by what has been. But the flip side of that is to people who are believers or who want to believe her, that allows them to paint a picture, paint a narrative about being excited for support. Like the right also makes a lot about Kamala's. Some of their talking points have been with regards to her performance as the border czar and her performance as the internet czar. But, the one actual job of the vice president is not to do anything and not to raise a fuss or not to be seen. And she did that really well. And all of these other those appointments that everyone loves to complain about were to deflect criticisms aimed at the president at the time. Those were the Biden administration's actual policy goals. And when pressed they they admitted it. It's been obvious that that's how they wanted to. That's how they thought the country was best to be run. And I do still think it very ironic that the best defense of the border policy of the Biden administration has been put forth by Bobby Kennedy, who made a case for it on humanitarian grounds. So I'm not surprised to see Harris gaining in popularity. As far as the methods that they are using, I mean, it's politics. Um, I think it's better to be spending money on influencers than to be sending money to robocallers to call people in their homes.
So you're of the no hold barred camp then, even if it violates FEC laws, like this guy claims that
I
that's
think
actually
I
what
think
that's
the
doing.
the FEC laws, as well as uh, uh, now I can't remember the amendment that I don't know, Kellyanne Conway was charged with breaking, like this notion of not using your offense. Now, um, I'm of the opinion to let money talk and to let candidates talk. The United States was like this notion of government both protecting protecting people, protecting ignorant people, creating all of these rules.
Well,
Who's
wait a minute. I mean, that we're not talking about that. Like, we're not talking about the campaigns talking. We're talking about them taking money that was given to a PAC and then paying off people to pretend like they're supporting somebody. Just like pure astroturfing. Like that. I mean, it seems different than what you're talking about. Yeah, let the candidates talk, but this is like fake grassroots support.
But I mean, isn't it all, or you're also making assumptions that these YouTubers, and I do believe that you're right, but that they don't believe in some part of it, or furthermore, that, I mean, part of the narrative of that is the people who are listening are ignorant. I think there's a whole lot of money and theater that is engaged in politics, and in reality, people actually vote in their best interest, but they're thinking about policies that aren't necessarily on our radars, or don't line up. So,
Well, at least some people have had integrity. They've blown the whistle on this stuff. They've said, "Hey, I was approached about this. My influence, my heart isn't for sale in this way." So I don't know. I guess I have more hope for a lot of people, especially at the base level. There's a certain amount of I'm just not going to do that and having a stand in integrity about some things. And I think that there's more of that at the bottom than that there necessarily is at the top.
well, I liked H. Ross Perot, and I liked Ron Paul, and I love Bobby Kennedy, and I do think that there is that. I guess part of whenever I'm watching political campaigns, I'm also thinking about what are the ideas behind the campaign, and what are the policies behind the campaign. So when I see Kamala Harris, I see a great departure in the Biden administration and the Republican, especially neocon support for foreign wars, and especially for the conflict in Israel, which has become a very divisive, to me, the most important and most divisive issue in the United States today. And even piggybacked on that, or very much correlated with it, is the notion of immigration. And our people, should we be setting up a world in which people can move around, or people can't? And it's interesting to me to hear um, the Democrats moving, um, tacitly encouraging immigration and believing in open borders, and then towing a line and telling the American people that they're clamping down on the border, and that they 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 are backing away from globalism, from the movement of goods and people around the world. Um, so I I think that Kamala Harris is moving to what she thinks the country wants, and they are broadly responding to that. I think Trump tells more. I I think that I think that Trump is. I think that Trump says America first, America first, America first. But then when I look at Trump and Biden, I hear them talking about Iran and China, and that worries me. I would I know it's one thing to focus on the money and who's being paid and how political action committees are working and who's abiding by the FEC rules, but there are real things that are going on there that are much harder to pin down. And I think Kamala Harris is making a right move in stepping away or calling out Israel with regards to how they are how they're engaging themselves with Gaza.
Wait, Harris is calling out Israel?
She didn't go to see. The vice president should have presided over the congressional audience that was held for Netanyahu when he came. And
Right, but I mean that's a pretty soft, passive aggressive sort of stance on Israel. Like, but she hasn't actually come out and said something from a policy perspective or like condemned the genocide in Gaza or anything like that, right?
I mean, I think that actions are much louder than words, and the fact that she nor Biden went nor spoke with Netanyahu when he came was, I was gobsmacked. I could not believe because she could have gone and told Netanyahu that she didn't approve, but by not going, that was a much greater statement. And notice that Netanyahu went from Congress and I forget, you showed me the other, brought up whenever we spoke about this the other day, the numbers on what 50% of Democrats didn't show up. You know, that's a great groundswell. And then look at her choice of the Minnesota governor for her vice presidential running mate. Why is that? You know what Minnesota and Wisconsin, these Lutheran countries or Lutheran states, sorry to call them countries, you know, we could throw Kansas and Nebraska in the mix too, are bastions of liberalism and not political liberalism but religious liberalism, and they are areas that there was massive immigrations to in the 1840s and 1850s, and even through like the 1880s. And where were those people coming from? Those were Ukrainian refugees, Protestants who had left the Russian steppes in the wake of the conflict there. And so their support for immigration is pretty solid. And not only that, they have very large immigrant communities. I mean, isn't Ilhan Omar from a Minnesota representative?
So Minnesota is a blue state. I mean, it's been a blue state. I think even when Reagan won, 49 states, Minnesota was the only state that didn't turn. So it's a very weird pick in a lot of ways. And people have criticized this pick. So I don't know that I'm going to say a lot new, but from my perspective, like as soon as he got the Democratic nomination for his party, he had the governorship, and that was repeated over and over again. So it's like there's not been a statewide race won by a Republican in Minnesota, like, and I'm talking statewide, so like any of the state you know, positions, Senate, like all of that stuff, it has not gone the way of a Republican in quite some time. And that's frankly why I was super surprised to see Trump in, you know, nowhere's land, St. Cloud, as his stop right after Bitcoin Nashville. It was like, here you're dealing with, you know, billionaires and power peddlers, and then you go make a stop in Timbuktu, Minnesota. Like, for what purpose? Like, you're not going to turn this state. And, you know, as far as like what does Harris gain by putting Walz on the ticket, I mean, this state is going to go her direction regardless. So I don't know what she hopes to gain by picking up a governor who is extremely divisive as far as Minnesota politics goes. Like, there's a lot of people who have a lot of problems with things that he's done, and he presided over some really bad optics. I mean, if you look at some of the things that occurred, from the city burning down, to the riots, to the calling up of the National Guard, to his problems in his past, things that have happened to him, or criticisms that have been leveled at him. He's not a swing state governor. He doesn't come with a groundswell of support. He certainly doesn't bring much in the way of fundraising. It's a baffling pick in many ways, just absolutely baffling. Like, when I heard names like Pete Buttigieg or the dude from Pennsylvania, I mean, those all made sense, but like picking Walz just made zero sense to me. So I don't know what they're thinking.
It was a surprising pick for me too, Grant. When I was in the Marine Corps, my roommate was from Minnesota, and he grew up living his life in Minnesota. And he would tell me a lot of the stories about Minnesota, and I would go back and visit his family and visit the state. And right after I got out of the Marine Corps in 2007, I actually moved to Minnesota for a few years, and I actually served in the Minnesota National Guard. And I remember when they had the Republican National Convention, or not I think it was the Republican National Convention there in Minnesota, that I got called up as a National Guard to be kind of like the protection and make sure that nothing got broken out in the streets. And I also, it's been really unique on some of the things that have happened in Minnesota the last couple of years. I don't want to go into too many, details of things, but the deep funding of the police force was very large in Minnesota. That was a big thing that happened. It was a big topic. And then, also things of happening of that nature. It's just a really surprising pick for me. And then that they have a large immigration population in Minnesota. I know that my friend used to speak a lot about the Hmong people, and I wonder if they have anything to do with the policies when it comes to the state of Minnesota. Do you know of anything of that, Grant?
So there's a large influx of Hmong, and then there's also a large influx of Somalis. So yes, we have had a very open border with respect to bringing in immigrants and what have you. The thing about Minnesota that is, very odd for a state, right, that tries to attract like that, is it is brutally cold here. I mean, so cold that if you are homeless, you're going to have a real hard time surviving, like, period. Like, you need heat and shelter to survive this climate, because for at least 4, maybe 5 months out of the year, the environment is actively trying to kill you. And so if you come here as an immigrant, you're not prepared for that unless you come from a place that is cold like that. And so when you look at the politics of the state with respect to its immigration, its stance on sanctuary cities, and a bunch of stuff like that, it is as liberal as it can possibly be. And that is largely dominated just by the Twin Cities area, the major state portion of the state. And Ilhan Omar is the representative to Congress from that particular county. It's from Hennepin County. Mostly, like that's where that congressional district almost entirely resides. And so as soon as she got the nomination from the party, she was going to have that seat. So again, it's all dominated by party politics, and everything that you see Chicago doing and major liberal areas, like Minnesota in a lot of ways wants to emulate that. Even the word Minneapolis like harkens to like trying to be the little New York City, is the way that I've heard people describe it, is that's what Minneapolis wants to be. It wants to be just like Chicago, wants to be just like New York City, extremely liberal. And there's this great divide between the outstate part of the state, which is dominated by farmers and hunters and a lot of people who swing the other direction politically. And so there's always been this great divide between the rural and the urban, and it was a purple state for a long time, which is where we had a bit of balance between the two. But it started to swing the other direction ever since there was a lot more people that have moved into the Twin Cities area. And so now, if you can capture that vote, which Walz was capable of doing, and most Democratic statewide candidates have been capable of doing, that they just sail into office and there is no resistance in any other way.
So, well, there's the immigrant communities that are there. Also, there are larger immigrant communities in the High Plains and the northwestern territories west of Ohio. That's where the bulk of them are. But the reason that they come over due to immigration law, they're sponsored. Who are they sponsored by? They're sponsored by churches, and the Lutheran Church is massive in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and also the Mennonite Church, and it is those reformational churches that are the backbone of immigration support. I'm not surprised about Kamala Harris. I actually thought it was a great read because. And I know that it's politically expedient to talk about closing our borders today and about the problems that immigration brings, but we here talk a lot about money, and we understand that we're creating money out of fictitious debt. We had an interesting case brought to us yesterday with Ayed from Tunisia, and the idea floated about, like, of Tunisia's. That Tunisia does not allow use of the dinar outside of Tunisia. What happens in the United States when we don't allow the use of the dollar in the rest of the world? And that might not seem to make sense, but a lot of the problems that we have, from immigration to globalism to the flight of blue collar jobs, has to do with that monetary policy. And it's been the tool of politicians for the last 100 years to create more dollars and to get us cheaper things from the rest of the world, to take advantage of other countries in the world rather than to take care of Americans. So I think that it is also, both as we've seen the collapse of the dollar and the $35 trillion of debt that we have created due to those policies, that politicians are desperately seeking alternatives, and some of those alternatives are going to be a return to their ideological base, and so I think immigration becomes a very interesting topic here. I think it is part of the most crucial part of American identity. What was the American experiment about? It was about liberty to seek freedom. There were supposed to be all of these states that had an agreement of commerce that was not based in coercion, but friendliness and cooperation. And part of that agreement was that people could move from these various states to states. So even when I see, like, Tim Walz and some of the COVID policies, the quote unquote socialist or coercive policies, I say it's one thing for us to see that at the level of the federal government. It's another thing to see it at the states. And I think that we're going to see more politicians who begin to make that distinction. And I think that state governors who are more quote unquote socialist or communist or whatever word you want to throw at it. Those are words that we created after the Civil War. But those who also maybe take more of a moral compass and direct their states and take an attitude of, if you don't like it, you can leave, is going to be what we see in the future. But the flip side of that is they're going to say, if you like it, you can come too. So when I think of Pete Buttigieg, I think he would have been a terrible pick because of his associations with McKinsey. And I think that also part of the the setup that we're seeing from Trump, Harris, and Kennedy, all three, is that the true bogeyman are corporations, and I think that's a much healthier bogeyman, because nation states can control corporations. To be incorporated originally meant to be incorporated into the tax code, because you could provide services that the public sector couldn't, that either couldn't, or that you wanted to see some sort of gameability in the quote unquote private sector. And we've gotten away from this. We've adopted these imaginary definitions of what the state is and what a corporation is, based on the abuse of monetary systems and income tax, transitional taxes, that we've seen since for the last 150 years. And so we've got to get away from this notion of passing money around and taxing that, working ourselves to death while leaning on a water cooler and not doing anything all day. And so I think Harris is making absolutely the right moves here. I think that that it's alarming to me that the course of the Trump-Vance campaign has been to vilify Iran more and more and more, and China more and more and more. So I would prefer to see Harris, and if Harris continues to do so, no matter what's happening with the Democratic convention and the party politics, if she continues to make a case that there's going to be opportunity for all, and she's going to win. And hopefully they will begin to understand what has gone on with money, because it's not that I love the world that we live in today, but I understand that you build a wall, people are going to get around it. Why? We understand incentives. And if we're creating money out of nothing, and the rest of the world is hoodwinked into believing that, then I don't care whether rich or poor or educated or not, the smartest, most motivated people are going to go stand next to the money tree. And we shouldn't fault them for that. We should ask ourselves why we're creating money out of nothing, and then bemoaning the fact when it works against us.
Interesting take. Well, should we turn to our other topic? I want to talk about Chia for a minute.
Yeah, let's talk about Chia. And I'm because yes, I'd like to know. I know you were emailing back and forth with some of the authors of the DoD paper, but I haven't even heard from you what your DoD update is. So give it to us.
Yeah. So I reached out to the author of the paper. So this is Ethan Schofield. That's the guy who's listed at the top here on this paper. So Ethan Schofield and Mark Reith. Mark Reith we found pretty easily, but Ethan took a little bit more digging to track him down. But I did manage to track him down, and I asked him some pretty basic questions, about his paper, right? Like, was the paper sponsored in any way? It wasn't. So this is not something where the DoD asked them to do this. The paper was authored by Ethan because he was working on a master's degree program in cyber systems at the Air Force Institute of Technology. And his professor encouraged him to seek publication of it. So there's no tie to like the DoD. Like, this is his thoughts and musings on it, right? I also asked him like what his personal experiences were with Chia. Said he's never farmed it, never run a full node, hasn't worked on any parts of those technologies. As far as the virtual private blockchain part, he didn't really know what it was. He didn't have a good sense of like what he was actually referring to here. Just caught his eye that it was interesting. So I don't believe that there's been any, interactions with CNI or anybody particularly. And I asked him, like, do you have any hands-on experience with Chia? Also, no hands-on experience with Chia. Didn't have a sense of what Chia Lisp was. So as far as us getting excited about this paper, I'd say probably not something to get excited about. This is published, but getting published in a journal or anything like this is a matter of submitting your paper and then just sitting back to see if they accept it and want to put it into their conference and whatever. And so I think our initial read on this, which I had before I had a chance to talk with Ethan, communicating with him over email, was that there wasn't a lot here, and that there didn't seem to be any direct correlation between this paper and any move in the direction of the Department of Defense towards Chia. And I think that was confirmed through my interactions with him, and the take that this was just somebody who had very little experience with Chia, musing about how it might be able to be used and not having a lot of understanding of the current ecosystem. All of those things were confirmed. He really didn't know about what had been happening with respect to the move towards compression and kind of hybridizing of the chain between hard drives and GPUs. And so, yeah, my conclusion to this is that there's not a lot here. This isn't any great revelation. There's no move by the DoD towards Chia, and that this wasn't something that, the community should focus on or try to say this is, a great next step towards the Chia blockchain from the Department of Defense or any government entities. At least this paper does not evidence that. And my interactions with the author pretty much dispelled any of those notions or rumors.
Well, there's I see some bright rays of sunlight there. I mean, I would prefer to see emergent interest in Chia and a stumbling upon. I mean, going back to our previous conversation about political action campaigns or whatever groups and campaign finance money. I mean, it would great, if CNI was spending a dime or two on marketing. Actually, I prefer that they don't, because I think that building robust and useful systems, I'm a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. So I really I don't know. I'm glad to hear that narrative, and I would love it if we could get them onto the show to tell them a little bit about some of the aspects of Chia that they possibly haven't considered, because I think they're, we bundle a lot of people into our notion. We bundle a lot of groups and divisions into the word government, and even into the military industrial complex, but they are made up of people who are often looking to make the systems better, to make them more accountable in their ways. And we know this is a good tool that they could use to do that. So
yeah, from that perspective, that is definitely what has occurred here. Somebody naturally happened upon the Chia paper and got excited about the ideas that were presented in the paper. The disconnect for me is that the community seemed like they were excited about it because, that the DoD is attached to it, right? That name is associated with it, and that there was maybe some move in this direction. So it definitely is that somebody naturally happened upon Chia, got excited about it, but that excitement didn't extend far enough to actually using the technology, didn't actually extend to spinning the thing up and playing around with it, especially for somebody who's at an institute of technology, right? I couldn't fathom something like this, Lucas, personally. If I was excited about a piece of technology, I wouldn't sit on my hands and not try to run a full node, right? Like, I would try to do something with some of the tech, to actually play around with it, to touch it, to poke at it, right? When I found Chia, I mean, that's what I started doing. I started plotting, I started farming, I started doing stuff. I started working with the technology to see what I really thought of it. And I've done that with a variety of different blockchains. So I couldn't imagine doing it this way, which is, being ostensibly excited about something, but not having that excitement actually project into the world of running the technology, running the software.
Well, you're not taking into account the enormously sensitive political nature of the Department of Defense.
Well, wait a minute. There's no Department of Defense involvement here. We've got somebody who's at the Air Force Institute of Technology.
Well,
He's a master's student. They can run the tech. Nobody
whatever.
will stop him from doing that.
Well, whatever the branch it is, they're incredibly conservative in pitching ideas out there. And forget not that 6 months ago, I mean, as we see the Torres or the SEC case against Ripple, and all of their other cases, the Democratic narratives, and there are true believers that crypto and blockchain are for drugs and criminals and terrible, terrible, terrible things. So that we saw them pitching interest in trying to change the narrative. I mean, we also went into software war and maybe part of the defense of the incredible links that he went into to describing everything was to help break those associations by just by throwing not all the book but all the books at the reader or the listener at once. So I think that I think that not only that, but let's say that they didn't or weren't that excited, and maybe they were just looking for something to publish. In the world that we are in today, with politicians gravitating toward the idea of crypto, towards the strategic asset reserve, those who come forth with these notions of actually using blockchain for what it's better for are going to they're going to make more impressions and make more steps by making a better use case of technology. So if not, then somebody else will soon be on it. Again, I think we should coax them in the right direction.
Okay, but just so we're clear on exactly what has happened here, we have a master's degree student at the Air Force Institute of Technology. That's what I have on the screen, right? He was encouraged by his professor to submit this paper to this conference. That's the extent of what has happened here. There is no buy-in from the DoD. There's nothing like that occurring here.
Oh, okay. Well, granted, for all the Chia community members who thought that this means that the Department of Defense is going to put their trillions and trillions of dollars into buying XCH, no, I don't think that's going to happen. Okay,
so as long as we've cleared that up, because like to me, that's the most important takeaway here is that, you know, what has actually been done here. So we had somebody who is at the Institute of Technology, master's degree student. Granted, I mean, this is an institution. Like, this is no joke to be here. So I'm not trying to belittle what he's done in any way. But he wrote a paper and he submitted it to a conference. It was accepted. It was published. As far as like the DoD, the only reason that is even in the conversation here is because it was in the title of the paper. So if he had omitted the words, that he still would have published this paper. You know, if it would have been on the cyber defense use case of Chia, right, and would have left it at that, he still would have gotten the paper published. It still would have been at this conference, but it would have had nothing to do with the DoD, because the DoD doesn't have anything to do with it other than he's musing on that maybe the DoD could use it. And there was an interchange that we had where I had asked him specifically about that. And he said, well, you know, there is some amount of gear that's sitting around at the DoD that could be put towards this use case. So, I mean, he's at least thinking about it. And there are people that are thinking about that, right? Because there's abundant hardware at the DoD that is sort of sitting idle. And he's theorizing that it could be used towards something like this, and that the Chia blockchain could be used. But this is just one person's opinion. It wasn't sponsored. And, you know, these are the things that I'm just hoping to give an update on. This is not to say that I don't hope that people, you know, find a good blockchain or a good piece of technology that they want to use to achieve some goal, but just making sure we're clear about who published it, why, and what the traceability is.
Okay, I see your point, and I think you make yes, I see where we should not encourage fantasies about I don't know, the DoD relationship. But still excited that they were interested and that they stumbled upon us. But what about? Can we talk about? Well, both Russia's banning of YouTube. I also wanted to, if we have time, to get into the Boeing spacecraft and what's going on at the International Space Station.
Yeah, let's talk about Russia blocking YouTube.
Well, we saw last Friday. We saw Turkey ban Instagram. Why did they ban Instagram? Because Instagram was censoring content that censoring the content, not only content in support of Palestine that they've been censoring for quite some time, but specifically what they banned it for last Friday was for Instagram's censoring of content that was supportive or lamenting or condoling the assassination of the Hezbollah leader. And I bring that up because YouTube has been engaging in the same practices. And YouTube, if you mention the word genocide, it demotes your content massively. YouTube also, I'm sure, has been engaging in other censorship with regards to Ukraine, and so that would have to be why Russia has decided to block it. Like not only YouTube, but we saw Putin make remarks last week that he was going to, or that Russia was going to also ban Mac products, Apple products. So I don't know if they just meant the App Store or if they actually meant the operating systems. But this goes to a longer narrative that we've had since the supply chain problems coming out of COVID, to the security concerns even before that with regards to all of our devices being made in China, the TikTok narrative, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we are going to see more regional, more thought put into domestically developed hardware and software. So because we see our government especially abusing its association and the location of these platforms in the United States to solicit its narrative or elicit its narrative around the world, and even with regards to us, the United States citizens. Our content is censored, deplatformed, also. So I'm not surprised. And it'll be interesting. The most interesting thing I look at here and think of is what will be the outcry of Russian people coming out of it. I mean, they're not necessarily concerned, or many of them won't be concerned, that their experiences and views have been manipulated. I don't know if you want to add to that or if you're looking around, but did you related
Well,
to
I wonder what the alternative is, right? So I put that the link to this news article about banning iPhones. I wonder what they're going to use in lieu of this, right? Are they going to use an Android phone? Maybe they're going to use the new Starlink cell phone. I wonder what the more secure phone is that Russia thinks it should gravitate towards. I can't imagine that they're actually proposing Android phones, because that's been pretty well established that Android phones have flaws in them so that they can be cracked by people who get physical access to them, whereas the Apple phones have had a large degree of difficulty doing that. I'm not sure what Russia's hoping to gain by by doing this, and they have some allegations about, you know, it being part of U.S. espionage, but I don't think we've actually seen that evident.
Well, they got to start somewhere, and I mean, if I were in Russia, I would see it as an outsized problem, the reliance on the United States for technology, for platforms, even a worse operating system, or something that has to be like physically compromised is a better option than just running to the cookie jar because there are cookies in it.
I'm not sure about that though. I mean, Apple's taken a pretty strong stance that you know, you can't break into their phones, and that they've held a pretty hard line on security. And the government has bemoaned this and been very upset with Apple because there aren't an easy way to backdoor the phone. So if somebody's an Apple user and they don't have some other, you know, way to get into the phone, like they've had a hard time breaking into them.
Well, there would have been once upon a time that I think Russia and the rest of the world would have thought that they could lean on the United States for our supposed moral authority, our moral code. But in the wake of detaining and torturing people for years and years and years, in the wake of unabashedly spying on our citizens, and when they find about it, just passing laws that say, oh, you can spy on citizens, engaging in lawfare against political candidates. I don't know if you saw that the FBI searched the house of Scott
Ritter's? Is that that Ritter?
Yes, Scott Ritter. Yesterday, I don't know if you saw the release to the thread on X today with regards to the Biden administration's team that was in charge of demoting accounts that were questioning Joe Biden's mental acuity, and also manipulating the platforms so that, say, if you searched for Biden and coherence or other terms that were associated with his brain function, that would associating those with him giving, a rave performance at a speech, or some sort of eloquent talk, or walking around lively and gracefully. So, that's the actual true real world that we live in. And Apple can talk a big talk about not bowing down to the government, but I wonder how long in jail, isolation, solitary confinement it would take to get some of the Apple executives or Apple engineers to change their mind.
Well, once you change it for the government, you change it for the world of every bad actor out there. If they're, I mean, I think it's Meredith, the person who's top person at Signal, the CEO of Signal, has said this repeatedly, that any attempt to put in a backdoor for a special privileged entity will be manipulated and used by the bad guys out there to get access to data. And I think that's a far more worse specter for Apple, who has, an international reach, to contemplate having their entire fleet hacked because they're putting in some backdoor for the government. So I think that they're probably still on the right side of things, and I don't think that they have caved. And if they had, the bad actors out there would be all over it to exploit that, because there's a large amount of money to be made if you can compromise the iOS platform.
Well, perhaps the world that we see in the future fixes that by locking down on the money supplies and getting rid of this notion of one state's currency being used for world trade around the world. I think the more and more that I think about um, the alternative, and you actually using exchange commodity swaps and a true exchange system without one great denominator. I think that solves so many of our problems, not just immigration and the problem of bad actors who can get their hands on dollars. But then that also causes us to question what will be the future of Bitcoin or some of these cryptos that are supposed to be replacing the dollar, replacing gold. That's it. That's a longer pensive talk. I'm not even ready to make that. The space station and the Boeing aircraft. Can we talk about that for a couple of minutes? Because that is unbelievable.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I'll pull something up.
I have a link over in the chat if you want to grab one of those. Boeing has a spacecraft that brought 2 astronauts out to the International Space Station back in June. I'm not sure what time in June it was, but since they arrived at the space station, they've had some sort of issue with, I think, leaks, helium leaks, or I've caught it before, and I didn't pay that much attention to it because, our media platform said it'll be fixed in a couple of days, and they'll be on their way back because they're only supposed to be out there for 2 weeks. But weeks have turned into months. They're still there, and it seems now that the latest news is that they can't fix the Boeing spacecraft, and it's called the Starliner. They can't fix this Boeing Starliner, and so instead, what's going to happen is Elon Musk's space company, SpaceX, has a vehicle called a Dragon, and they're going to send it out. It has room for 4, and they're going to send it with 2 empty seats to go pick up the 2 astronauts.
Well, this is kind of a big deal. I don't know if you're familiar with Scott Kelly's book, but I'm pretty sure that Scott Kelly is the person who's spent the most amount of time in space. So I think he was up there for a year, and he's a twin. So he's I think he's a military individual. He was an astronaut. He was up there for a period of time. And when he came back down, they did a bunch of comparisons between him and his brother as far as the effects of what happened to him from being in space. And it wasn't good. Definitely cannot be up in space for a super long period of time without there being adverse effects. So these guys being up there longer than they'd anticipated is definitely not good for their long-term health. And it just shows, this wild incompetence from Boeing that whatever craft they went up there in that they need to get rescued. It's pretty shocking that we're in this situation, and it's pretty interesting that Elon Musk has a reliable space vehicle that you can get people in and out of Earth orbit. That's pretty wild.
Well, remember whenever NASA, we canceled NASA and we decided to go the route of private contractors for space vehicles, and that was supposed to be one great improvement, and I think it was. I mean, I think that we see great innovations from SpaceX.
Clearly they've been able to make a reusable rocket, and they've put more stuff in space than any entity that's ever put stuff in space before, and they've done it faster than NASA, who's been working on this forever. Now, granted, they probably stood on the shoulders of a lot of what, groundwork was laid by NASA. It's hard to discount the amount of effort that's been put towards space exploration by both Russia and the United States as far as understanding how to do this stuff. And, all this rocketry doesn't come from nowhere. So I don't think SpaceX gets the credit for knowing how to do all this stuff a priori, but they've certainly taken it to the next level in terms of efficiency and their ability to do things that I don't think NASA even contemplated primarily being the reusability of the rockets and the reusability of different pieces. And if you look at how big those rockets are, that it's like putting a skyscraper into space and then landing it without any damage to it. It's pretty impressive. But yeah, as far as the amount of time somebody can spend in space, it's not good to be up there for a super long period of time. And they definitely need to come back if they're not going to have deleterious effects.
Well, I think that the real loser in that concept, and I totally agree. We've seen incredible innovations from the Starlink satellite systems to the reusable rockets of SpaceX. But think about the difference in the Boeing and Lockheed Martin, etc. The contracts, the planning. The reliance on I don't know, government plans and requests for design. I think that is a failing paradigm. You see the budgets blow out of proportion for them. The political gamesmanship of distributing those jobs, decisions that are not made with regards to the reliability of the product are a huge problem. And we've seen that with the lower quality of aircraft that have been produced by Boeing. We see it here with the Starliner. We see it in the explosion of budgets for all of those more or older defense companies that begin to live off of their government budgets, their government handouts. So I think that there was also Virgin Richard, what the hell? There was also Virgin. There's been other companies that went the private route and were very innovative that maybe didn't have as much success. But when I think about SpaceX and Elon's array of companies, because he did this ostensibly to a large degree with Tesla, and tried to innovate for auto manufacturing, whereas you saw correlated to the Boeings and the Lockheed Martins and McDonnell Douglases, the Fords and General Motors, and car companies that hadn't really made any great innovations or strides for our ground transportation for quite some time. But problem here that we see is countries are going to be nervous about being reliant on a company that they cannot control. And I think X might, I like to believe that X is trying and is doing their best in not manipulating our experience and not demoting views that they don't agree with, but they were before, and it didn't take incarceration or imprisonment under Twitter. It just took a replacement of some of the members of their board and some of their managerial staff with people whose views were aligned with the government. So I don't know how that one's going to work for X, all the various X's. But I am glad that they do have an alternative to bring the astronauts back before their bones liquefy, or God knows what else happens in space. Anything else before we close it out, Grant?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right. See you tomorrow.